On this episode of the program, we'll take a look at some of the powers of the National Assembly and the impeachment attempts against President Buhari. What's the correct interpretation of Section 82 of the Nigerian Constitution as regards the appropriation bill? We have the views of a senior advocate of Nigeria, Professor Fidelis Oditah. We also have the reactions of some senior lawyers to the conviction and sentence of a senior advocate of Nigeria, Joseph Nwobike, on charges of attempts to pervert the course of justice, plus our weekly recap of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to this episode of Law Weekly. I am Shola Shoyeli. On Thursday, the 26th of April, senators were divided along political lines following a motion for the impeachment of President Muhammadu Buhari. The chairman of the Senate Committee on Public Accounts had moved the motion for the impeachment of the president over his approval and withdrawal of some dollars from the excess crude account without the lawmakers' consent. In a letter to the senators, the president explained that he gave an anticipatory approval to purchase some aircraft from the U.S. government because of time constraints and the hope that the lawmakers will raise no objections. Now, reactions continue to trail this move, especially the correct interpretation of Section 82 of the Constitution. On this episode of the program, we have the views of a senior advocate of Nigeria and a Queen's Counsel in England, Professor Fidelis Oditah. I began the interview by asking the Prof if the withdrawal of funds from military aircraft without it being budgeted for amounts to an impeachable offense.
It is certainly an offense. It is misconduct. It shows a very lax approach to constitutional provisions. The question whether it is a misconduct sufficiently serious to attract impeachment is a separate question, but those are essentially political questions for the National Assembly.
Give us an interpretation, if you will, of what constitutes a misconduct, because I've heard some lawyers say that certain provisions of the Constitution allows the president to do what he has done and get away with it.
There is no provision of the Constitution that allows the president to appropriate almost $500 million. There is Section 82, which provides emergency appropriation or utilization powers to the president up to the amount drawn from the consolidated fund in the immediately previous Appropriation Act. But if you look at what was in the previous Appropriation Act, that's the one of 2017, I think the provision for military helicopters and aircraft, if I'm not mistaken, was about 20 or 21 billion naira in total. And the amount which he's taking this time round, it's about 151 to 170 billion naira, depending on the exchange rate you use, 305 or 360. So on any view, he's taking an amount which is 8 to 9 times what was in the previous Appropriation Act. However liberal you are, that is misconduct. And I don't see that there is anything one can find in Section 82 or indeed any other provision of the Constitution which allows the president to dip his hands into the national cake and say, well, we need to use this money because we've got a window of opportunity. I don't think that the law allows that.
So it won't amount to misconduct if the amount was lower?
If it was within the amount, then he could take refuge in Section 82. Then you would say he's exercised the Section 82 powers, because Section 82 allows in certain circumstances the exercise of powers based on the previous Appropriation Act up to the amount appropriated.
And he can't cure it by subsequently writing to the lawmakers to include it in the yet-to-be-released budget?
Well, the breach is complete when he withdraws the money. The question is whether he can be forgiven by the National Assembly. I don't know whether, of course, clearly they can overlook it, but that doesn't mean that the breach is not complete. It's like if you were to drive a car under the influence of alcohol, you've committed an offense. The mere fact that the policeman sees you and doesn't arrest you because he's exercising a power that he doesn't have to be lenient doesn't authorize or justify your conduct.
Now let's move on to the election sequence judgment of the Federal High Court. Again, there's an issue of interpretation depending on which side one belongs to. Some lawyers think that the National Assembly can rightly tinker with the laws as they have done.
I think there are several aspects to that problem. The first, of course, is that the National Assembly is vested with the power to make laws by Section 5 of the Constitution. But the power to legislate has to be within the constitutional framework. And the Constitution has given powers to the legislature, the National Assembly. It's also given powers to certain bodies, such as INEC, in a desire to make them quasi, or at least operationally independent. The National Assembly has to appropriate funds to INEC, but operationally, INEC has to be independent if it's got to conduct free and fair elections. And one of the ways of achieving operational independence is by endowing INEC with the power to conduct elections. And the power to conduct elections must include the power to determine the dates of those elections. And the power to fix dates includes the power, in the absence of any other provision, to determine what the sequence should be. So to that extent, INEC was acting within its right. That's one aspect. Even if the National Assembly had a right, should they exercise that power retrospectively in relation to the 2019 elections, after INEC had announced a timetable and a sequence? So I could concede or accept without conceding, or assume that the National Assembly could make any laws relating to elections. But I don't necessarily agree that those laws can operate retrospectively. So where INEC has, in exercise of its own constitutional powers, fixed a sequence and dates for elections, I don't believe that the National Assembly could pass a law which then retrospectively nullifies that and says, well, you cancel what you've done and start all over again. So that's the second aspect of it. The fact that there's a court judgment is neither here nor there, because in many systems, including this one, the National Assembly could pass a law to reverse a court decision. For example, the court might say, you don't have a right to clap your hands. But the National Assembly could pass a law saying from now on you have a right to clap your hands. So to that extent, the court decision is reversed. And in the same way, I believe that the decision of the Federal High Court can be reversed. But the true question is not the reversal, is the retrospectivity. Is it possible and is it desirable for the National Assembly to retrospectively set aside a timetable which has been fixed by INEC? And in my view, and for the sake of good order, the answer must be no.
So in your view, should they just wait for the next elections?
They should have started on time. They should have anticipated this problem, passed the law before the timetable was announced, and then said the sequence is X. I'm sure if they had passed a law saying this is a sequence, INEC would have followed that sequence in announcing the dates. But having left INEC with a blank slate, and INEC having exercised powers which it thought it had, I think it is wrong for them to retrospectively nullify the exercise of that power. They can do so prospectively, but I have real difficulty with saying that they should do so retrospectively.